Well, I have to admit, my expectations about this watch were rather low. I did hope and expect it to be interesting, bit different and kind of fun, but I didn't expect it to be a very well-made watch, or at least I didn't expect it to be a very, very well-made watch. Which is probably why when this watch arrived, because my expectations were so low, that it surprised me as much as it did. Hello, you're watching James. My name's James, you're watching me, and I am talking about watches, and I'm talking about Wish Do It. Wish Do It? Wish Do It? Wish Do It. I'm not really convinced about the brand name of this particular one. It is a little bit strange, but what I can say about this watch that is not strange is how good it is. Now, it's not a high-level luxury watch by any means, but it is certainly not this super affordable sort of quality homage that I was expecting. It is, in fact, something beyond just interesting, beyond just a little bit different. It's actually quite a well-made, well put together, well thought out, homage-inspired watch. And I do want to say thank you to Wish Do It for sending me this watch. This is not a watch that I would have actively chosen or reached out and said, hey, I want to buy this watch. In fact, it's a watch when it was offered to me by Wish Do It that I initially thought no, because I don't actually accept all watches that are provided to me. I actually say no to many of them. But this one, it just had a style to it which I hadn't experienced before, and I thought, well, at least it would be something different. But it's turned out to be more than that. And because they did send me this watch, you would have seen that sponsored icon pop up, and I'm going to leave some links down below directly to the Wish Do It website. And when you do look at that website, you're going to see a rather common theme amongst all the different models they have available. And you're going to see some differences in prices too, because they seem to range between around 350 Australian dollars all the way up to around about 800 Australian dollars. There is a couple of quartz models in there, but most of them, like the one that I'm going to show you today, is actually a mechanical watch. But you're going to see a similar style throughout their ranges, but some real differences in what they've got going on in their dial. There's some really interesting skeletonized versions. There's some with characters. There is options available if you're into this particular style. There's even different materials and cases, colors that are available to you. So if you are interested in this style, this might be a website that is worth checking. And if you are looking to pick one of these watches up and you think that brand name is a little bit odd, be mindful that on some of their options, that brand name is sort of pushed out onto the dial and you can see it clearly. And others, like the one I'm going to show you today, it is more subtle. It is less in your face. In fact, the one that I've been experiencing, the one that I'm going to share with you today, it's on the dial in a place and in such a size, or a small size, that you almost don't see it. As you can see, this one that I picked up came in with some really good packaging. For this sort of price range, I actually think it's slightly better than I expected, but it is a slightly sort of surprising watch in many aspects. This one here is the Pioneer Silver. Pioneer is the style of what's going on the dial. Silver is the case color, and of course it's on a black strap. And it did surprise me when I pulled this watch out of that case, just how much detail was involved in this particular watch, especially when you flip the watch onto its side and see the machining of it, see the machining on the crown, see the machining on that case profile. But it's obviously this skeletonized dial that grabs your attention first of all. And when you look deeper into it and closer into it, you're going to see some rather interesting stuff going on, because if you actually look at the architecture holding this movement in place, holding the hands in place, you'll see there is a difference in the textures that have been used. There's a brushed finished, and then there's some black applied as well. So you have this black and brushed, which I think is actually fairly detailed and beyond what I expected from this. There's also those two ruby looking jewels, one at the sort of 12, one at the 6, which do stand out to you a little bit of flash of color. And then of course there's those two subdials, which initially I was a little bit confused about, because the left one is a running second hand, even though there is a other main running second hand, but the one on the right is a 24-hour subdial. And when you look closer at those subdials, you'll see that they are done really well as well, because not only is there a flat surface there, but there is an angled little chapter rings around the edges of them. And because it is skeletonized, it's probably a less legible watch than you would expect, but what they've done with those hands, those partially skeletonized hands, but also the markers denoting the hours, they've made them polished. So they stand out a little bit more than what's behind it, especially when this one is captured into the sunlight, because those hands and those hour markers do sparkle, so they stand out a little bit more. And when you turn the lights off, although the lume is not incredible, it is absolutely present and is usable. But also what is surprising is that those little sub-dial hands also have a splash of lume on them. And as I mentioned, that brand name is up there at the 12 o'clock, but it is relatively small. On camera here, under these closer shots, it does stand out. However, in real life, on wrist, it actually sort of blends into the rest of the markings around the outer side. And then we look at that mineral crystal, and it is mineral crystal. It is a good mineral crystal because it has a lovely curvature that sort of covers that skeletonized dial, but also integrates into this case shape. And it is a rather interesting case shape. It's the first watch that I've ever experienced that looks like this one. Obviously, this is not an exact unique design. It is heavily inspired by a very expensive line of watches, but it is an interesting design, and it is an interesting design that is very comfortable on wrist. And I think that may be a big part of why this watch is shaped like this, why watches have been designed like this, to actually be comfortable on wrist. In fact, it is not a particularly small watch. When we look at the case itself, at the widest point from left to right, it is 43.4 millimeters. And of course, it is rather tall. The height of this watch is 15.3 millimeters. And the lug to lug is slightly not applicable because of how the strap integrates, but if we just measure the steel part of the case, it is 50 millimeters. And that lug width, that is sort of non-applicable as well, but the widest part of that strap is 25, and it does taper down to around about 20 millimeters. And the weight of this watch, as it stands, as it is 97 grams. And the strap, as you look at it, is not something that you are going to be changing, because I can't see how you would remove it even if you wanted to remove it. Not that you do, because I think it suits this watch, it integrates into this watch, and it is very comfortable when you have it on wrist. Looking at the sides of these watches, it is a tall watch, but what that does give this watch is a lot of room to do some interesting stuff. Because when I first looked at it, when I glanced at it, I thought it had a rather rough sort of manufactured sort of ground out sort of texture to it. But what it actually has is a mixture of a number of surfaces. Beyond the extra 3D effects that this particular watch has on the sides, there is a mixture of brushing and bead blasted. It has a almost industrial look to it, but as you look closer, you can see that it is actually very specifically made to look like that. And then you look at that crown. And I don't think I've come across a crown before that has this much detail, this much depth, this much texture to it. It's very easy to grab hold of, very easy to use, but it also just is a major feature of this watch. And then you turn it around and you see through that mineral crystal case back. It is also a nice large piece, allowing you to see that automatic movement. And I'm not sure what this movement actually is. I've looked on the website, I've tried to identify what it is, but all it says is that it is an automatic movement. It obviously has some features going on, allowing those two sub-dials, but what it does have also is hacking and hand winding. And when you put it on the time grapher, you'll see the results are rather interesting, because I'm not quite sure what the lift angle of this one is, so I'm not going to comment too much on the results. I just wanted to show you what it looks like at this sort of more standard lift angle. And for once, for me, the strap on this watch is actually a little bit of a standout feature, because normally rubber or rubber-based straps are not for me. Purely because that I feel that when I put a watch on with a strap like this, it feels like a tool watch. And this watch does not feel like a tool watch, partly because of how this strap integrates into this style watch, but also because of the design of it, but also because of how comfortable and soft it is. This is one of those straps, when you touch it, it has this lovely soft texture to it, and it just suits this watch and then holds it down really nicely on wrist. Because even though you can see that this watch sits rather tall off wrist, you can also then see how it sits onto and almost into the wrist. It really grabs hold of the wrist, nestles down into it, and that strap really holds the watch nicely and creates that real comfort feature of this watch on wrist, because it is a very comfortable watch, albeit sitting very tall off your wrist. So that brings me to, what do I like about this watch? What don't I like about it? And what would I change? The thing that I like most about this watch is the details. I love watches that have details. Details that aren't always specifically obvious the first time you look at it. It's something that draws you into the watch and you sort of delve into it. And these skeletonized dial type watches are always going to have some good, interesting details. But it's when you look at this one closely and all the elements of it, especially the architecture holding that movement in place, how 3D the size of this watch is, how that crown feels in hand, and then when it's on wrist, albeit sitting rather tall, is very comfortable. But that tallness is a little bit of a concern, and it stops me wearing this watch more than I probably would like to if it was a little bit lower on wrist. And that's probably the first thing that I probably don't like as much. And that brand name, Wish, Do It. I wish they didn't do it because it would be better if that was not on the dial. This particular model, it doesn't stand out too much, but I'm now making an excuse about a brand name being on a dial that you don't see too much, so it obviously then has to be on a dislike, and that is something that I would definitely change. I'd like to remove that, maybe put more of a logo versus a name on it, and bring the height of that watch down a little bit, because if it was a little bit thinner, and it had a different name on it, I can foresee myself wearing this watch a lot more. As it stands, it's something that I've been enjoying wearing, but it has been an occasional wear. That has something to do with the style, however, because it's not really the style watch that I wear regularly. And if you are somebody that does like this style, that is interested in this style, I can foresee this one being something that's worth considering. And if it's worth considering, it's also worth considering watching these videos next.